A tired truck driver was humiliated in front of everyone for being too dirty to sit down until a quiet stranger stood up, wiped his hands, and changed the entire diner forever. What no one knew that night was that the stranger was Keanu Reeves, and that one small act would soon ripple across America. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The desert night was still except for the hum of engines parked under flickering lights. A rest stop off Interstate 40 sat like a lonely outpost in the middle of nowhere, half lit and half forgotten. Inside, the diner's neon sign buzzed, throwing a pale red glow on cracked pavement. A handful of travelers lingered inside, sipping coffee to fight sleep before their next stretch of highway. Through the glass door came Sam Colton, a man shaped by the road. His faded jeans were caked in dust, his shirt damp with sweat, and his boots heavy with miles of asphalt. His hands were stained with the black of diesel fuel, and his face carried the tired look of someone who hadn't seen home in weeks. He paused just inside the doorway, the dry wind following him for a second before the door shut. The smell of coffee and pie hung in the air. He scanned the room, searching for an empty booth. At the far end of the counter, Keanu Reeves sat quietly, a black cap pulled low over his eyes. He had been driving alone after a charity event in Albuquerque, taking the long road west. He liked places like this, quiet, forgotten, ordinary. They reminded him that America's beauty often hid behind the noise. Sam found a booth by the window and sat down with a slow sigh. The seat creaked beneath him. He reached for the laminated menu, but before he could flip it open, a voice cut across the room. "Sir," said the owner, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a white apron. Her name tag read, "Lydia. You can't sit there looking like that. This is a clean establishment." The room went still. The clink of forks stopped. Sam froze, his hand halfway to the menu. He looked up, unsure if he'd heard her right. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice rough from hours on the road. "I said you're too dirty to sit on my seats," Lydia repeated, her tone clipped and loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're tracking dirt all over the place." A young couple at the counter looked down into their plates. An older man in a flannel shirt shook his head slowly. Someone near the jukebox whispered, "That's harsh." Sam stood halfway, embarrassed, as if he had broken a rule he didn't know existed. He brushed his hands on his jeans, leaving faint smudges. "Ma'am, I've been driving all day. Just wanted to grab a meal before heading on." Lydia crossed her arms. "Then grab something to go. My customers don't need to eat next to a man who looks like he rolled out of a ditch." The words hit harder than she realized. Sam's jaw tightened. His shoulders slumped. He nodded once, quietly, trying not to make a scene, but the shame in his eyes was clear. Across the room, Keanu Reeves looked up from his mug of coffee. The heat rose from the dark liquid, blurring the reflection of the man sitting alone. What he saw in Sam's face wasn't just exhaustion. It was the weight of being invisible. He'd seen that look before in construction workers, janitors, and stagehands who kept the world running without thanks. Keanu set his cup down slowly, the faint sound breaking the silence. The waitress behind the counter shifted uncomfortably. Sam turned toward the door, his boots scraping the floor. The moment felt heavy, stretched thin between cruelty and decency. Keanu stood. Every eye in the diner followed as Keanu Reeves rose from his booth. His movement was calm, deliberate, without anger or hesitation. He wasn't the kind of man to make a scene, but something about this moment cut deeper than any public slight. The hum of the old refrigerator filled the silence that Lydia's words had left behind. He walked toward the counter, his boots echoing lightly on the tile. The waitress, a timid young woman named Marla, froze mid-step as he passed. She recognized him, her lips parting in disbelief, but Keanu gave a small nod that told her to keep quiet. This wasn't about who he was, it was about what was happening. Lydia stood by the register, arms folded, still guarding her pride. Keanu reached over, grabbed a clean towel from the stack near the coffee pots, and turned toward Sam. "Excuse me," he said softly. Sam looked up, startled. Keanu handed him the towel and smiled faintly. "Here, you've got some grease on your hands." Sam hesitated. "It's fine. I'll wash up outside." Keanu shook his head. "No, you're fine right here." He knelt beside the booth, surprising everyone. The whispering started again, louder this time, as Keanu dampened the towel with a bit of water from his glass and began gently wiping Sam's hands. The rough skin, the cracked knuckles, the years of labor all visible in the small act of kindness. The gesture wasn't dramatic. It was simple, human, and powerful enough to melt the room into silence. "The roads of America," Keanu said quietly, "are run by people like you." Sam blinked, unsure what to say. The shame that had filled his chest a moment earlier now turned into disbelief. "You don't have to do that, sir." "I know," Keanu replied, standing again. "But sometimes the people who hold this country together deserve to sit down without asking permission." Lydia's expression faltered. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The other customers exchanged looks, a wave of unease crossing their faces. One man near the window muttered, "He's right." Another woman nodded silently, her eyes moist. Keanu handed the towel back to Marla and walked to the register. "How much for his meal?" "He hasn't ordered," Lydia said flatly. "Then I'll start with 2 plates of your best," he said. "And while you're at it, add everyone else's meal to my check." The room gasped. Lydia frowned, thinking she'd misheard. "Everyone's?" Keanu nodded. "Everyone's. It's been a long road for all of us tonight." Marla's hands trembled as she wrote the ticket. The sound of a fork hitting a plate broke the quiet. Someone clapped once, awkwardly, then stopped. Sam looked around the room, his face red with emotion. He wasn't sure if he should stay or leave. Keanu looked at him and smiled. "Sit down, friend. Dinner's on me." The warmth in his voice left no room for argument. Sam, Saturday. The man who had walked in dirty and ashamed now sat taller, as if the weight of miles had finally lifted, if only for a moment. The smell of grilled meat and hot coffee slowly returned as the tension began to fade. Lydia retreated toward the kitchen, her pride bruised but her conscience stirring. Marla, still shaken, poured a fresh cup of coffee for Sam and set it down with a gentle smile. "It's on the house," she whispered. Sam nodded, his voice too tight with emotion to reply. Keanu slid into the booth across from him. The leather squeaked softly beneath his jacket. "So," he said, glancing at the old patches sewn on Sam's denim vest, "how many miles have you driven this month?" Sam let out a low chuckle. "Too many to count. Been on the road since Monday morning, delivering supplies down south. I was just trying to rest my eyes before the next load." "You deserve more than just rest," Keanu said quietly. "You deserve respect." Outside, the neon sign flickered again, casting faint red light over the window pane. Inside, the mood shifted. The other travelers began talking again, softly at first, but now with a strange tenderness, as if something invisible had just changed. A man in a baseball cap offered to buy Sam dessert. The young couple at the counter smiled his way. In that tiny roadside diner, a man who had walked in invisible suddenly became seen. Keanu didn't talk about fame or money. He simply listened as Sam shared fragments of his life, 2 kids back home, long nights on empty highways, memories of his late wife who used to pack him sandwiches for the road. Every word carried honesty, and Keanu's silence carried understanding. When the plates arrived, Keanu raised his cup slightly. "To the men and women who keep this country moving," he said. Sam lifted his cup in return, his rough hand trembling. For the first time in years, he smiled without forcing it. And as the clock ticked past midnight, no one noticed the celebrity in the corner. They only saw a man who had reminded them all what decency still looked like. The clinking of silverware faded as Lydia's voice cut through the diner again, sharper this time. "I said take those filthy boots outside. You're dragging mud across my clean floor." Sam looked down. The cracked leather was splattered with dirt from a loading dock in Amarillo, a reminder of 28 straight hours on the road. He lifted one heel awkwardly, as if to apologize to the floor itself. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "I've been driving since yesterday morning. I just dropped off relief supplies for that storm down in Texas. Haven't had time to rest yet." Lydia waved her hand dismissively. "That's no excuse for walking in here like that. We all have jobs." The words hung heavy in the air. Sam swallowed hard. He wasn't looking for sympathy, just a meal. He'd eaten gas station sandwiches all week, slept in his cab with the windows cracked open. His shoulders slumped under the weight of fatigue and humiliation. From his booth, Keanu Reeves watched every movement. The hush in the diner grew thicker, almost unbearable. He could see the discomfort ripple through the room, people shifting, pretending not to notice. The silence wasn't neutral. It was complicit. Sam muttered softly, "I'll take it to go then." He started to rise, his knees stiff from hours of driving, but the booth groaned and stuck slightly. Lydia crossed her arms and stepped back, shaking her head. "No, sir. You'll wait outside. I don't want you tracking more of that grime through my restaurant." Keanu's jaw tightened. Something in Lydia's tone, the cold, careless edge, stirred something deep in him. It wasn't just rudeness. It was the way she looked at the man, as if his work made him less human. He rose quietly from his seat, pushing his chair back with a soft scrape. No one realized who he was yet. The baseball cap and worn jacket made him look like another traveler. But the calm authority in his movement drew every eye as he walked toward the counter. He stopped near the coffee station, where a stack of towels sat next to the carafes. Without asking, he took one, poured a small bit of water into a glass, and approached Sam. "Mind if I help?" he said gently. Sam blinked. "Help with what?" Keanu smiled faintly, holding up the towel. "Looks like you've been carrying half the country's dirt on your hands." The room froze. Lydia's eyebrows furrowed in disbelief. The waitress, Marla, stood frozen near the pies. Keanu knelt slightly, wetting the towel, and began to wipe the grime from Sam's rough hands. The towel turned gray as the diesel and dust lifted away. No one moved. The sound of the wet fabric was the only noise in the room. Sam whispered, "You don't need to do that, sir." Keanu's tone stayed even, steady. "Maybe not, but someone should have done it a long time ago." He finished cleaning Sam's hands, folded the towel neatly, and set it aside. Then he stood and looked around the diner, meeting every stare one by one. "Do you know what these hands do?" he asked, quietly. "They deliver food, medicine, and fuel. They keep the lights on. The roads of America are run by people like him." Lydia's face flushed, but she said nothing. The air inside the diner felt electric, charged with something that no one could quite name. Keanu's words had sliced through the awkward quiet like a steady flame. Even the old clock above the counter seemed to tick slower, as if listening. Lydia stood motionless near the register, her lips pressed thin. "Sir," she said finally, "I appreciate the sentiment, but that doesn't change my policy. We try to keep things clean here. People don't want." Keanu turned to her calmly. "People don't want what, exactly? A man who works for a living to sit beside them?" Lydia hesitated. She hadn't expected to be challenged so directly. "Look, you don't understand how it is. We get all sorts coming through here, some track in mud, some smell like oil. It's bad for business." Keanu's voice softened, but every syllable carried quiet authority. "Business isn't the only thing that matters." He gestured toward Sam. "Do you know what he was hauling tonight? Relief supplies, water, blankets, food. He's been driving for more than a day to help strangers he'll never meet." Murmurs spread across the diner. A middle-aged man in a plaid shirt shook his head slowly. "That true?" he asked. Sam nodded, embarrassed. "Yeah, I was in Houston last night, then over to Amarillo. Tornado cleanup, FEMA contract. Figured I'd make it to Flagstaff before morning, but I couldn't keep my eyes open." The room grew still again, this time with respect. The young couple who had been pretending to scroll through their phones now looked directly at him. Keanu smiled faintly. "That's the kind of man you told to leave, ma'am." Lydia's eyes darted toward the counter. "I didn't know that." "That's the point," Keanu said. "You didn't ask. Marla, the waitress, set down her tray carefully. "He's right," she said under her breath. Lydia shot her a look, but the girl didn't back down. Keanu took a slow step closer to Lydia. "You run a place like this, you see hundreds of faces every week, but you never know what someone's been through before they walk through your door." He paused, his tone steady and kind. Kindness costs less than coffee, but somehow, it's the one thing people forget to serve. The line hung in the air, echoing off the diner's walls. Someone at the counter exhaled audibly, as if they'd been holding their breath. Keanu turned back to Sam. "You said you hadn't eaten yet?" Sam shook his head. "Didn't plan on sitting down anywhere fancy. Just wanted something hot." Keanu smiled and gestured toward the counter. "Then let's fix that," he called out to Marla. "2 dinners, please, whatever your best is. And add everyone else's meals to my bill." The room erupted in stunned silence. Lydia blinked. "Everyone's?" Keanu nodded. "Everyone's. No exclusions." Marla's eyes widened. "That's a lot of meals, sir." Keanu reached into his jacket, took out a folded envelope, and set a few crisp bills on the counter. "Then let's make it a night they'll remember." Lydia stared at the cash on the counter. Her voice caught somewhere between pride and disbelief. "You don't have to do that," she murmured. "I know," Keanu said, his voice calm, unshaken. "That's why it matters." Marla took the money hesitantly, her hands trembling as she began scribbling down orders. Around the diner, the atmosphere shifted like a quiet wind. People exchanged glances that carried something unspoken: humility, gratitude, maybe shame. The man in the plaid shirt leaned towards Sam and said softly, "Hey, brother, thanks for what you do." Sam gave a small nod. "Just doing my job." But Keanu turned to him. "That's what makes it remarkable. The people who keep everything moving don't call it heroic. They just call it Tuesday." Marla refilled cups of coffee, her nervousness melting into a faint smile. Lydia disappeared into the kitchen, the door swinging back and forth, the sound of pots clanging echoing faintly through the diner. Sam leaned forward, still uneasy. "You didn't need to do that, sir. I wasn't looking for pity." Keanu shook his head. "It's not pity, it's recognition. There's a difference." He glanced around the room, watching the travelers now smiling faintly, the tension replaced with quiet admiration. "We're all just passing through," he said. "Some of us with cameras, some with cargo. But it's easy to forget that one small act of respect can change how the road feels." Sam looked down at his hands, clean now, though still rough and scarred. The towel lay folded neatly on the counter, a symbol of something small yet monumental. "You've done a lot of driving yourself?" Sam asked. Keanu grinned slightly. "A few miles here and there. Enough to know the road doesn't care who you are. But people should." The door to the kitchen creaked open. Lydia stepped out holding 2 plates roast beef dinners, steaming hot, with mashed potatoes and buttered rolls. She walked over slowly, her eyes softer than before. Without meeting Sam's gaze, she set the plates down. "On the house," she whispered. Then, she turned back toward the counter without another word. Sam blinked, unsure how to respond. Keanu raised his cup of coffee and said quietly, "To the people who keep America running 1 mile at a time." Sam lifted his cup too. The diner had fallen silent again, but this time it was a peaceful silence, heavy with respect instead of judgment. Outside, the neon light flickered, and the endless highway waited. Inside, something invisible had shifted forever. For a long moment, no one in the diner said a word. The air seemed suspended, filled only with the faint buzz of the neon sign outside and the low hum of the refrigerators. Then, the whispers began. They started softly, half gasps, half questions, as people realized what they had just witnessed. A teenage busboy named Eli stood frozen near the corner of the counter, a stack of plates trembling in his hands. He had seen hundreds of drivers come and go, some gruff, some quiet, but never had anyone stood up for one. His eyes darted from Keanu to Sam, unsure if he was dreaming or witnessing something that would live in his mind forever. At one of the booths, an older couple leaned toward each other. The husband whispered, "Is that really him?" The wife shook her head slightly. "Does it matter? Look at what he just did." The diner's tension slowly shifted into murmured awe. Someone chuckled softly, almost as if embarrassed by their earlier silence. Another person clapped once, then stopped, unsure if applause fit the sacred quiet that had fallen. Lydia returned from the kitchen, her expression mixed with irritation and disbelief. "I don't need your charity," she said firmly, directing her words at Keanu. "You made your point. Now please, take your food and go." Keanu looked at her, calm as ever. "It's not charity," he said. "Then consider it gratitude." The words hung there like a warm light in the cold. He turned back toward Marla, who had tears in her eyes, and handed her more cash than she'd ever seen in tips before. "For your kindness," he said simply. She nodded wordlessly, her throat tight with emotion. He helped Sam sit back down, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "You've done enough miles for one day. Eat slow." Sam hesitated, still half stunned, but Keanu's quiet tone carried a weight that cut through the fog of humiliation that had hung over him minutes earlier. Across the room, the conversations began to change. The same people who had looked away before were now speaking with unexpected warmth. A man at the counter raised his coffee cup. "To the truckers," he said. "You folks keep this country alive." A few others nodded. The young couple at the window smiled awkwardly, then added their own quiet thanks. Even Eli, still clutching the plates, whispered under his breath, "Thank you, sir." Sam tried to reply, but his voice caught. He wasn't used to being noticed, much less thanked. The sudden respect in the room left him unsure what to do with his hands. He laughed softly, shaking his head. "I just drive where they tell me." Keanu smiled faintly. Sometimes that's enough to change more than you realize. Outside, headlights glowed in the truck lot. Engines idled in rhythm like the steady heart of a sleeping giant. Inside, the diner had changed. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just quieter, softer, as if everyone there had been reminded of something they'd forgotten, that decency can spread faster than cruelty. Lydia stood near the counter, arms crossed, watching as Marla refilled Sam's coffee cup and carefully slid a slice of pie onto the table beside him. Every gesture felt like a quiet apology from the world itself. Lydia's jaw tightened. The shame she felt began to push through the layer of irritation she used to protect herself. Eli, the busboy, wiped down the counter even though it didn't need cleaning. His mind replayed the moment over and over. Keanu kneeling to clean Sam's hands, the hush that had fallen across the room, the way everyone seemed changed afterward. He had never seen dignity restored like that. He stole a glance at Keanu, who now sat calmly across from Sam, talking in a low, even tone. Lydia broke the silence first. "You didn't have to make a spectacle of it," she said bitterly. "People might think I'm heartless." Keanu turned slightly, his voice steady but gentle. "I don't think anyone here believes you're heartless. Maybe just forgetful." She frowned. "Forgetful of what?" "Of what this place used to mean," he said, nodding toward the window. "A diner isn't just where people eat. It's where they rest, where they remember they're not alone on the road." The truth of his words hit her deeper than she expected. Lydia looked down at her apron, stained with coffee and time. She had opened the diner 15 years earlier, back when her husband was still alive, when truckers like Sam would stop by and swap stories late into the night. She remembered the sound of laughter, the jukebox playing, the smell of bacon and diesel blending into something that somehow felt like home. But since her husband's passing, something had hardened inside her. Business had become her armor. Eli watched her quietly. For the first time, he noticed her eyes weren't angry, they were tired. Marla approached the counter. "You okay, Mrs. Hunt?" Lydia didn't answer right away. Her voice finally came out quieter than before. "I used to serve men like him every night. My husband was one of them." She blinked, forcing the memories back behind her composure. Sometimes the dirt reminded me of how hard it was losing him. Guess I took it out on the wrong person. Keanu's gaze softened. Then maybe tonight can remind you of something better. Lydia nodded slowly, the bitterness leaving her face. Maybe it already has. Around the diner, the conversations grew warmer. The couple at the window laughed quietly again. A man who had been eating alone walked over to thank Sam for hauling relief supplies to Texas. "My brother's town got hit by that storm," he said, shaking Sam's hand. "You folks saved lives." Sam smiled, a little embarrassed. "Just doing what I can." Keanu looked around, listening to the change in tone. It wasn't noise anymore, it was gratitude. The kind of sound that could fill a quiet place and make it feel alive again. Outside, the low rumble of engines hummed, steady, a chorus of diesel and duty. Inside, hearts that had once turned away now turned toward one another. Lydia moved back toward the counter, her steps slower this time. She grabbed a clean towel from the rack and began to wipe an already spotless section of the counter, more out of habit than purpose. But her thoughts were somewhere else, on the faces in the diner, on her husband's faded photograph hanging in the back office, and on the man sitting a few feet away quietly reminding her what kindness looked like. Keanu finished his coffee, set a few bills on the table, and gave Marla a grateful nod. "Thank you for the service," he said simply. She smiled through her tears, her voice trembling. "Thank you for everything." Sam sat still for a moment, holding his fork without moving, like someone trying to absorb a moment they never expected to experience. The food in front of him was more than a meal. It was a kind of dignity restored. He looked at Keanu. "I don't know how to thank you." Keanu leaned back, his voice calm and low. "You already did. Just keep driving safe. That's thanks enough." Sam nodded, his throat tightening. He wasn't used to being seen, let alone respected, by someone the world seemed to orbit around. But Keanu's eyes carried no judgment, no fame, only quiet sincerity, the kind that didn't need an audience. Across the diner, Eli finally gathered the courage to speak. "Sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "my dad's a driver too. He's on the road right now, probably sleeping in his cab somewhere in Nevada. I'll tell him what you did tonight." "He won't believe it." Keanu smiled. "Then tell him it wasn't about me. Tell him people still care." Eli grinned shyly and went back to stacking dishes. His chest lifted with pride. Lydia turned toward Keanu one last time, her tone softer now. "I'm sorry for the way I acted. He's been a long few years. Sometimes I forget what respect looks like until someone shows it." Keanu gave a small nod. "We all forget sometimes. What matters is remembering again." Outside, the truck lot glowed under the dim orange lights. Engines rumbled in the distance, steady and strong, like a living heartbeat. The night wind carried the faint smell of fuel and coffee. From the window, Keanu looked out at the endless line of trucks waiting for dawn and said quietly, "That's the sound of America working." No one in the diner disagreed. For once, everyone understood. And as Keanu stood to leave, the silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was filled with gratitude, with reverence, with the quiet pride of those who just witnessed a moment of decency that would not be forgotten. The food on the table had long gone lukewarm, but neither man seemed to care. The air between them was thick with the kind of stillness that invites truth. Keanu sat back, elbows on the table, his coffee cooling in front of him, while Sam stared at his plate as if deciding whether to speak. "You don't owe me an explanation," Keanu said softly, "but if you feel like talking, I'm listening." Sam nodded slowly. "It's been a long few years," he said, his voice carrying that low drawl common among men who had spent decades behind the wheel. "Used to run a small auto repair shop just outside Tulsa. Started it with my wife Linda. We worked side by side for almost 15 years. He took a breath and let out a dry laugh. We used to joke that she ran the place and I just lifted the heavy stuff. Truth is, she was the heart of it. Customers came back just to talk to her. She'd bake cookies for the kids who waited with their parents while I worked under the hood. Those were good days. Keanu listened quietly, his eyes steady and focused, giving Sam the kind of attention most men forget to offer. Sam continued, his tone darkening. When the pandemic hit, business just stopped. Nobody was driving, nobody was fixing. Rent didn't stop though. Bills didn't stop. We tried to hold on, but after 3 months, I had to let my last mechanic go. I thought I could recover, but Linda, she got sick. It wasn't COVID, just bad timing. Doctors said it was her heart. His voice caught for the first time. She was gone within a week, just like that. The diner seemed to shrink around them. The chatter that had filled the air moments ago faded into background noise. Keanu didn't interrupt. He just let the silence give weight to what Sam had said. After that, I sold the shop, Sam continued. Didn't make much, but it kept the lights on for a while. My daughter, Rachel, she's in nursing school now. My boy's working construction down in Kansas City. I send what I can. Sometimes it's a little, sometimes it's nothing. They never complain. That's the part that gets me, they never complain. Keanu nodded slowly. Sounds like you raised them right. Sam smiled faintly, eyes glistening under the diner's dim light. I tried. But somewhere along the way, I became one of those faces people stop seeing. You know what I mean? You walk into a place, and they don't see a man, they see a stain, a noise, something they'd rather ignore. Keanu leaned forward, his voice gentle. I know that feeling better than you might think. Sam looked at him curiously, unsure what he meant. Keanu gave a small, reflective smile. When my sister got sick, I spent a lot of time alone. People saw me, but they didn't see the grief. They saw a name, not a person. Fame doesn't make you visible. It just hides the pain better. Sam nodded slowly, understanding more than words could say. Sam let out a slow breath and looked through the window at the parking lot beyond. The hum of truck engines felt almost like company. It's strange, he said. You spend your whole life trying to build something you can touch, something you can pass down. Then one bad year, and it's gone. You start over, except this time, there's no one in the passenger seat. Keanu followed his gaze, watching the rows of idling trucks, with their headlights glowing faintly in the dark. Starting over is harder than most people admit, he said. It takes strength to keep moving after life strips away everything you thought you needed. Sam nodded. Some days I think about stopping, parking the rig, selling it, maybe finding something else to do, but then I think about Rachel. She calls me every Sunday, tells me about her classes, says she wants to work in pediatrics, help kids who can't afford care. She always says, "Keep driving, Dad, you're getting me closer." So, I keep going. Every mile's another tuition payment. There was a long pause before Keanu spoke again. She sounds like your wife. She is, Sam said quietly. Same kind of heart. Linda used to say that kindness doesn't cost anything unless you ignore it. She believed people were still good deep down. Keanu smiled faintly. She was right. Sam's eyes softened. You married? Keanu shook his head. No. Lost someone a long time ago. Someone I loved very much. Life took her before her time. Sam studied his face for a moment, realizing there was a depth behind those calm eyes that most people never noticed. Sorry, man. That kind of pain, it never really goes away, does it? Keanu looked down at his hands. No, but it changes shape. After my sister passed from leukemia, I thought I'd never find peace again. Then one day, I realized peace isn't forgetting, it's remembering without breaking. Sam nodded, understanding completely. I get that. When I'm out there on the highway, it's like I can still feel Linda sitting beside me. She used to talk nonstop, pointing at every sunset, every diner, every truck stop with a funny name. Now the quiet's too big. Keanu's eyes lingered on the road visible through the window. I know that quiet. I used to think silence meant loneliness. But sometimes, it's the only place where the people we love still speak. Sam smiled faintly. Never thought I'd hear something like that in a rest stop diner. Keanu chuckled softly. That's the thing about the road. It brings people together who were never supposed to meet, but somehow need to. The clock above the counter ticked on, unnoticed. For a moment, two men who lived worlds apart found themselves on the same stretch of road, bound by loss, by endurance, and by the quiet kind of strength that grows from surviving it. The diner had mostly emptied now, leaving behind the soft hum of the lights and the faint sound of tires rolling along the distant highway. Outside, the wind rattled the flags above the pumps, and for a brief second, both men sat without speaking, content to share the silence that only travelers truly understand. Sam took another sip of coffee, then looked at Keanu with quiet wonder. "You know," he said, "I've met a lot of folks on the road, truckers, farmers, soldiers, drifters, but I don't think I've ever met anyone who listened like you do." Keanu smiled. "Sometimes listening is the only way to see people clearly." Sam nodded, his voice softening. "You ever get tired of being recognized? People treating you different?" Keanu paused for a long moment before answering. "Sometimes. But the truth is, people don't really see me. They see an idea. They see a face from a screen, not the man behind it. The funny thing is, fame and invisibility aren't that far apart. You can be everywhere and still feel alone." Sam looked down at his rough hands, then back up. "Guess we've both spent a lot of time invisible in our own ways." Keanu's eyes warmed. "Maybe that's why we met tonight." They both laughed quietly, a tired but genuine sound. Sam leaned back in the booth. "You know what gets me most? It's not the hours or the miles, it's how quick people are to judge. I've had folks talk to me like I was nothing just because my hands were dirty. They don't know that those same hands kept their food moving, their medicine on time, their lights on during a blackout. They just see the dirt." Keanu's gaze stayed steady. "People forget where comfort comes from. They see convenience, not the sacrifice behind it." Sam nodded. "Yeah, but tonight felt different. For the first time in a long while, someone didn't look through me." Keanu smiled softly. "You reminded this place who keeps the country running. I just helped them see it." Sam exhaled deeply, his shoulders finally loosening. "I'll remember this night, not because of the food or the coffee, but because someone cared enough to stand up." Keanu looked down at his cup, then met his eyes again. "That's what keeps the world turning, Sam. Not engines, not fame, just people caring for each other when no one's watching." The clock struck midnight. Outside, the trucks roared back to life, engines grumbling like giants awakening. Sam's eyes followed them, his chest rising with a quiet pride he hadn't felt in years. And somewhere between the glow of the diner lights and the hum of the highway, two men, one famous, one forgotten, found a brief, perfect understanding. The bell above the kitchen door jingled softly as Lydia pushed it open with her shoulder. The heat from the grills mixed with the smell of grease and coffee, wrapping around her like a heavy blanket. She slammed a plate onto the counter harder than necessary and muttered under her breath, "Who does he think he is? Just walks in here, throws money around, and makes me look like the villain." Eli, the teenage busboy, glanced up from where he was scraping leftover fries into the trash. He had been working there for only a few months, but even he could tell something was shifting. Lydia was always stern, always focused on rules and cleanliness, but tonight, her anger seemed to come from somewhere else. "He didn't make you look bad, Mrs. Hunt," Eli said carefully. "He just made everyone look at things different." Lydia turned sharply. "Excuse me?" Eli swallowed hard, but didn't back down. "Maybe he just saw what we didn't." The words hung in the air, trembling like the fluorescent light above them. Lydia opened her mouth to reply, but nothing came out. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of her apron. She could hear the faint murmur of conversation through the swinging kitchen door. She peeked through the small circular window. Out in the diner, Keanu and Sam were still talking quietly, the tension gone from their faces. For the first time that night, Sam laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was real, the kind of laugh that comes from relief more than humor. Lydia froze. Something about that laugh struck her like a memory she'd been trying to forget. Her father had been a truck driver too. She remembered the smell of diesel on his clothes when he came home. The sound of his boots hitting the porch, the way he used to lift her up with calloused hands that smelled faintly of oil and coffee. When she was 14, he had gone missing during a winter storm in Montana. They found his rig 3 days later, buried in snow off the highway. The police said he'd been trying to deliver a shipment before Christmas. He never made it back. She blinked hard, gripping the edge of the counter as her throat tightened. Eli stepped closer. "You okay, Mrs. Hunt?" Lydia took a breath, her voice barely steady. "Yeah, just tired." She turned toward the pie display case and stared at the slices she'd prepared earlier that evening. Apple, cherry, pecan. She thought about her father again, about how he used to say that every driver had 2 families, the one waiting at home and the one out there on the road. Her cruelty toward Sam suddenly made sense, and it sickened her. It wasn't about dirt. It was about grief that never left. She pressed her hand over her eyes, wiping away the first tear before Eli could see. Lydia stood for a long moment with her back to the door, staring down at the stainless steel counter. The sound of sizzling from the grill filled the silence, but she barely heard it. Her reflection stared back at her in the metal, weary and older than she remembered. There were lines around her eyes she hadn't noticed before, carved not by time but by resentment. Eli placed a tray beside her quietly. "You don't have to be hard on yourself," he said, not looking up. "People forget how much they carry until someone reminds them." She gave a faint laugh that cracked halfway through. "You sound older than you are, Eli." He smiled shyly. "My dad drives a rig too. He's been out on Route 66 all week. Sometimes, Mom worries he'll fall asleep behind the wheel. When that man walked in tonight, I just saw my dad." Lydia looked toward the pass window again. Sam was still sitting with Keanu, talking slowly between bites. Marla hovered nearby, topping off their coffee, her face soft with admiration. Sam looked lighter now, as though the weight of the world had lifted an inch from his shoulders. The sight broke something open inside Lydia. She pressed her hands to the counter, her knuckles white. "My father was a driver," she said quietly. "Drove tankers across the Rockies. Never complained, even when he'd been on the road for days. We lost him in a snowstorm when I was a kid." Eli stopped moving. "I didn't know that. Not many people do." Her voice trembled slightly. "He was supposed to be home for Christmas. I waited by the window all night. He never came back. I told myself I hated the road for taking him away. But maybe I started hating the people who reminded me of it too." She turned, wiping her hands on her apron, trying to steady herself. "I saw Sam and just reacted. It wasn't fair. I think I just didn't want to see my father's face in his." Eli's voice softened. "Then maybe you can fix that." Lydia blinked, surprised by the boy's calm wisdom. "Fix it? How?" He shrugged. "Start with dessert. That's what you always do when someone's hurting." The simplicity of his words made her smile, despite herself. She walked to the pie case again, slid open the glass, and pulled out 2 fresh slices of pecan, the same kind her father used to eat when he stopped at diners like this. She added a scoop of vanilla ice cream to each one and placed them carefully on small plates. Eli watched her quietly as she wiped the edges clean, smoothing each plate with precision. For once, she didn't seem like the stern boss who ruled the kitchen. She looked like a daughter trying to make peace with a ghost. She straightened her back and took a deep breath. "You're right," she said softly. "It's time to fix it." Lydia balanced the 2 plates of pie carefully in her hands as she pushed open the swinging kitchen door. The diner was quieter now, most of the customers finishing their meals or leaning back in their booths. Full and thoughtful. The air had softened, like the storm that had passed through had finally drifted away. She paused near the pass window for a moment, just watching. Sam was laughing again, quietly, his face lined with exhaustion, but lifted by something close to peace. Keanu listened with that same steady patience, nodding gently, letting Sam's words fill the space between them. Marla stood nearby, smiling as she wiped the counter, her eyes bright. For a moment, Lydia didn't see a customer or a celebrity or a stranger. She saw her father, sitting in a booth just like that, rubbing his tired hands together after a long winter drive. She saw the way he used to close his eyes when he took the first bite of pie, like it reminded him the world was still good. Her breath caught. She blinked hard, steadying herself, and stepped forward, setting one slice down in front of Sam and the other in front of Keanu. She said quietly, "On the house." Both men looked up, surprised. Sam hesitated. "Ma'am, you don't have to." "I know," Lydia interrupted gently, "but I want to." Her voice cracked slightly at the end, but she didn't hide it. She met Sam's eyes, really looked at him this time and said, "My father drove trucks too. I forgot what that meant. I shouldn't have treated you that way." Sam's lips parted in shock, then softened into a nod. "He must have been a good man," he said. "He was," she whispered. "He'd have liked you." Keanu smiled faintly, sensing the quiet healing unfolding between them. "Pie's the language of forgiveness," he said softly. Lydia let out a breath that sounded like relief. "Then, I guess we're fluent tonight." Eli watched from the counter, a grin spreading across his face as the room filled with a warmth that hadn't been there all night. Sam took a forkful of pie and closed his eyes for a second, savoring it. "Best I've had in years," he said. Lydia smiled for the first time in a long while. "It's my dad's recipe." Outside, the truck engines idled low, their rhythmic hum echoing like a heartbeat across the desert. Inside, the air felt lighter, as pride, up 10. If something wounded had quietly mended itself. For Lydia, guilt had turned to grace. For Sam, shame had turned to pride. And for everyone else in that small roadside diner, one simple act of kindness had turned an ordinary night into something sacred. The clock above the counter struck 1 in the morning. The hum of the diner had settled into a quiet calm, like the end of a long conversation everyone wished could last a little longer. Outside, the parking lot lights buzzed faintly, casting wide pools of amber over the rows of parked trucks. Keanu leaned back in his seat, glancing at Sam, whose plate was now empty except for a few crumbs of pecan pie. Sam wiped his hands with a napkin, his eyes still soft from gratitude. The exhaustion that had once hung on him now looked lighter, replaced by a quiet sense of dignity. Keanu smiled faintly. "You look like a man ready to face another 1,000 miles." Sam chuckled. "I might be. But I'll remember this stop for the next 1,000 after that." Keanu nodded, finishing the last sip of his coffee. "Good, you've earned it." He stood, stretching his shoulders slightly, and reached across the table. Sam hesitated, then shook his hand. Keanu's grip was firm, his palm warm against the roughness of Sam's calloused skin. "Keep rolling safe," Keanu said. Sam's voice dropped to a whisper. "You too, friend. You've got a good way about you. The world needs more of that." Keanu gave a quiet nod, not responding with words. Some things didn't need to be said. He placed a few folded bills under his cup, enough to more than cover the meal, and turned toward the door. Lydia, standing near the counter, called after him softly. "Thank you for what you did." He smiled at her, not as a celebrity, but as a man who understood loss. "You already said it with that pie." Her lips curved into the smallest smile. "Safe travels." Keanu pushed open the door, and the desert air met him with its cool, dry whisper. The neon lights buzzed faintly overhead, illuminating the long line of trucks parked side by side like sleeping giants. He walked across the lot slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel, the night alive with the low hum of idling engines. The scent of diesel hung in the air, mixed with the sweetness of fresh rain that had passed earlier. When he reached Sam's rig, a weathered blue Freightliner with the words "Colton Hauling" painted on the side, he paused. The truck stood tall and proud, its chrome mirrors reflecting the glow from the diner behind him. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small piece of paper, and wrote a few simple words in neat, steady handwriting. "Thanks for keeping the country moving. K.R." He folded it carefully and slipped it under the windshield wiper, making sure it wouldn't blow away. Then he stood there for a moment longer, looking at the line of trucks fading into the horizon. Each one, he thought, carried a story like Sam's, a life in motion, unseen yet essential. He turned, hands in his pockets, and began walking toward his own car parked near the edge of the lot. The gravel crunched softly beneath Keanu's boots as he made his way across the dim parking lot. The air had cooled since he'd first arrived, carrying with it the dry scent of desert sage. A line of trucks stood silent, their chrome edges catching the glow from the diner lights. It was one of those American still life moments that only existed between midnight and dawn, when time slowed, and the world belonged only to those still awake. Keanu paused beside his car, a simple black SUV dusty from miles of travel. He glanced back toward the diner windows. Through the glass, he could still see Sam sitting at the booth, head bowed slightly, as if in reflection. Lydia was refilling the sugar jars, while Eli swept the floor, humming quietly to himself. The place looked ordinary again, but different, as if something sacred had quietly passed through and left the air changed. Keanu smiled faintly. He knew that tomorrow, no one would talk about the actor who stopped by a roadside diner. They'd talk about the man who reminded them that worth isn't measured in appearance or fame, but in heart. That was the kind of story he preferred to leave behind, one that outlived him. He opened his car door, then stopped. The stars stretched endlessly overhead, glimmering sharp against the black sky. For a long moment, he just stood there, breathing it all in. The hum of engines, the rustle of wind, the faint buzz of neon. It was the song of the road, and tonight it felt almost holy. Back inside, Sam sat for another few minutes after Keanu left. The silence in the diner felt different now, gentle instead of heavy. Marla came by with a smile. "Need anything else before you go, hun?" Sam shook his head. "No, ma'am. This was more than enough." Lydia approached hesitantly, wiping her hands on her apron. "You'll come through again sometime, won't you?" Sam smiled faintly. "I drive this route often. Maybe next time I'll stop here first." She nodded, trying to hide the emotion building in her eyes. "You do that." He stood, stretching his stiff back, and reached into his jacket pocket to leave a few bills on the table. "For the pie," he said softly. "And for the reminder that folks still care." Marla tried to refuse, but he held up a hand. "Let me." As he walked toward the door, Eli waved from behind the counter. "Safe drive, sir." Sam turned back, smiling. "Thanks, kid. You too." He stepped outside into the quiet night. The cool wind brushed across his face, carrying the faint echo of tires on the distant highway. The stars above looked clearer now, the kind of clarity that comes only after a hard day ends with something good. He made his way across the lot toward his truck, each step echoing faintly in the open air. He didn't notice the small folded note waiting under his windshield, not yet. Sam climbed up into the cab of his truck, the door creaking softly on its hinges. The smell of engine oil and old coffee filled the small space, his second home on wheels. He tossed his jacket onto the passenger seat and sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at his reflection in the windshield. The diner lights glowed behind him, their neon red letters flickering like a heartbeat in the distance. He reached for the ignition, but something caught his eye, a small white fold tucked neatly under the wiper blade. Curious, he opened the door again, climbed down, and stepped into the cool desert air. The sound of engines idling around him felt distant now, like waves on a faraway shore. He plucked the note carefully from under the wiper and unfolded it under the glow of the overhead lamp. The handwriting was clean and even, written with quiet certainty. "Thanks for keeping the country moving. K.R." For a long moment, he just stared at it. His throat tightened. The world seemed still around him. He looked up toward the sky. Stars scattered across the dark like freckles of light on velvet. "Nobody's ever thanked me for that before," he whispered. The words barely left his lips, but they carried years of fatigue, pride, and longing. His hands trembled slightly as he folded the note again and held it against his chest. In that moment, it wasn't about who had written it. It was about being seen. He looked toward the highway stretching west, its endless ribbon of light fading into the horizon. Somewhere out there, Keanu was already miles ahead, headlights cutting through the night. "Guess I'll keep it rolling like you said." He climbed back into the cab, setting the note on the dashboard where the moonlight could touch it. The engine rumbled to life, steady and strong. As he shifted into gear, he glanced one last time at the diner through the rearview mirror. Inside, he could see Lydia wiping down the tables, Eli turning off the lights, and Marla locking the door. Life was returning to its quiet rhythm, but nothing felt quite the same. The road called him again, as it always did. Only this time, it didn't feel lonely. It felt connected to strangers, to memory, to the simple grace of kindness shared between two men under the wide American sky. And as his truck rolled back onto the highway, the small white note on his dash fluttered in the cool draft from the vent, glowing softly under the light of the stars. The first rays of sunlight crept over the desert horizon, painting the highway gold. The rest stop that had been quiet and shadowed just hours earlier now glowed with a new kind of life. The diner's neon sign flickered off as Lydia turned the key in the front door and stepped inside. The air smelled of coffee and bread dough rising. She moved slower than usual, not from fatigue, but from reflection. Something inside her had shifted during the night. She didn't feel that familiar edge of frustration or loneliness that often greeted her mornings. Instead, she felt lighter. Eli arrived a few minutes later, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His baseball cap turned backward. "Morning, Mrs. Hunt," he said with a small grin. "You're opening early today?" "Morning, kid," Lydia said, flipping on the lights. "Yeah, figured I'd try something new." He set his backpack by the counter, stretching. "What's that?" She looked around at the empty diner, sunlight spilling through the windows, dust motes floating like gold flakes in the air. "Starting today," she said, "we're giving free coffee to every truck driver who walks through that door before 9 a.m. Eli blinked. "For real?" "Every one of them," she said, her voice steady but soft. "They keep this country moving. It's time we say thank you properly." Eli smiled wide. "That's awesome. They're gonna love that." Lydia nodded, her hands finding a rhythm as she arranged the napkin holders and wiped down the counter. She stopped for a second, glancing toward the booth where Sam and Keanu had sat just hours earlier. The seats were empty now, but she could still hear their laughter echo faintly in her mind. She pictured Sam's tired smile, the gratitude in his eyes, and the way Keanu had stood up without raising his voice, changing the room with nothing but decency. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, her father's old diner recipe, for pecan pie, stained in yellow with time. She hadn't touched it in years. "Guess we're bringing this back too," she murmured. Eli glanced over. "What's that?" "Something that used to make people feel at home," she said, carefully unfolding the paper. "My dad's handwriting. He believed a good pie could fix most things. Maybe he was right." Eli nodded. "He sounds like someone Keanu would have liked." Lydia smiled faintly. "Maybe they'd have gotten along." Outside, the morning trucks began to pull into the lot one by one, headlights fading as the sun rose higher. Drivers yawned and stretched, stepping out to greet the new day. Lydia poured the first pot of coffee, the steam curling into the air like a small blessing. For the first time in years, she felt her diner wasn't just a business. It was part of something larger, a small station on the highway of kindness. Hundreds of miles away, the sun climbed higher over the Arizona desert. The highway shimmered in the heat, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Sam's truck rolled steady along the asphalt, the rhythmic hum of the engine blending with the faint sound of country music playing through the radio. The night before still lingered in his mind like a vivid dream that refused to fade. He reached up to touch the folded note sitting on the dash, held in place by the small figurine of an eagle his daughter Rachel had given him. The paper fluttered slightly in the air conditioning stream, just enough to catch his eye every few minutes. Each time it did, he smiled. He thought about Keanu's calm voice, the way the man had stood up for him without anger, without arrogance. It wasn't pity. It was respect, something Sam hadn't felt from a stranger in a long time. As the miles passed, his thoughts wandered. He remembered the look on Lydia's face when she brought out the pie, the apology trembling behind her eyes. He remembered Eli's shy grin and Marla's kindness. It all felt unreal, yet deeply familiar, like a piece of his old life had found him again out there on the road. A road sign appeared up ahead. Rest area 2 miles. Sam flicked on his blinker and eased the truck onto the exit ramp. He parked in the shade of a weathered tree, the engine idling softly. The air was warm, dry, and clean. He reached for his logbook on the passenger seat, flipped past the pages of numbers and fuel records, and stopped on a blank page near the back. He hesitated, then tore it out carefully. From the glove compartment he pulled a pen, a cheap blue one he'd picked up at a truck stop weeks earlier, and began to write, "Dear Mr. Reeves." He paused, tapping the pen against the paper. That didn't feel right. He crossed out the greeting and tried again. "To the man who reminded me what kindness looks like." The words began to flow. He wrote about the night before, about how he had walked into that diner feeling small, invisible, and left feeling human again. He told Keanu about his late wife Linda, about Rachel and her nursing school dreams, about the long miles and the loneliness that often came with them. Then, he wrote the sentence that mattered most. "It was just a kind gesture, but I'll remember it for the rest of my life." He set the pen down, reading over the letter slowly. The words were uneven, the handwriting rough, but the meaning was pure. He folded the paper in thirds and slipped it into an old envelope he found tucked behind the visor. He didn't know exactly where to send it, but he remembered the name of Keanu's foundation printed once on a charity flyer he'd seen at a truck stop. He scribbled the address from memory, hoping it was right. Sam sat in his truck for a while, staring at the sealed envelope resting on the dash. It looked small and fragile, but inside it carried everything he hadn't said out loud in years. He turned it over in his hands, brushing his thumb along the edges like it was something sacred. The sun poured through the windshield, lighting up the cab in a soft orange glow. He turned the key, the engine rumbling to life again, and merged back onto the highway. The note sat on the dashboard beside him, and each time he looked at it, he felt steadier somehow. The road stretched endlessly ahead, but it didn't feel as lonely as before. An hour later, he spotted a post office sign off the next exit. He slowed down, pulling the truck carefully into a small desert town that looked half asleep. The streets were quiet, lined with a few faded buildings, a gas station, and a single mailbox that stood crooked near the corner. Sam parked by the curb, stepped down, and stretched his stiff legs. The dry air was still cool from the morning. He walked toward the mailbox with the envelope in hand, his boots scuffing the gravel. He stopped for a moment before sliding the letter in. "Not sure if you'll ever see this," he said softly, "but thanks anyway." He dropped it through the slot and listened to the faint sound of it landing inside. The echo was small, but it felt final, like closing a chapter. He stood there for another minute, the desert wind rustling his hair, before turning back to the truck. When he climbed into the cab, he caught sight of the note still taped to the dashboard. "Thanks for keeping the country moving, KR." He smiled, touching it gently. "Guess I returned the favor," he murmured. He pulled back onto the open road. The sun climbed higher, turning the sky into a brilliant blue. A convoy of trucks appeared up ahead, and he joined their slow, steady rhythm, the rumble of engines rolling like thunder across the desert. Somewhere, miles away, Keanu Reeves was probably on another road, unaware that his small act of kindness had traveled further than he'd ever know. Sam adjusted the rearview mirror, catching one last glimpse of the fading mailbox before it disappeared behind him. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man, driving toward another endless day. He felt like part of something bigger, a quiet chain of kindness stretching farther than any highway could reach. He smiled again, the road ahead glimmering with promise, and pressed gently on the accelerator, letting the miles unfold like hope beneath his wheels. 3 weeks later, the morning sun crept through the large glass windows of Keanu's Los Angeles office. Outside, the city was waking up, cars buzzing along Sunset Boulevard, Coffee shops opening their doors, the usual rhythm of noise and motion. Inside, it was quiet. Keanu sat at his desk, surrounded by neat stacks of scripts, fan mail, and letters from his foundation's projects. He preferred mornings like this, simple, quiet, honest. His assistant, Mara, entered carrying a small bundle of mail. "Morning?" she said softly, setting it on his desk. "Morning, Mara," Keanu replied, glancing up from a folder he'd been reviewing. "Anything urgent?" "Mostly the usual," she said, sorting through envelopes. "Donations, thank you letters, a few fan notes. Oh, and this one, it came without a return address, postmarked, from Arizona." The handwriting's a little shaky, but something about it felt different. She handed him a worn, slightly crumpled envelope. Keanu turned it over in his hands, noticing the faint smudge of diesel and dust on the paper. There was no name on the front, just his foundation's address in faded blue ink. He slid a finger under the seal and unfolded the letter slowly. The handwriting was uneven, but careful, like every word mattered. "To the man who reminded me what kindness looks like." Keanu's eyes traced the lines as the words began to breathe life into the quiet room. Sam had written about that night at the diner, the long drive, the exhaustion, the embarrassment, and the small act that had changed everything. "I walked into that place tired, dirty, and invisible. I walked out feeling like a person again. You probably don't remember me, but I'll remember you for the rest of my life. My daughter's studying to be a nurse. I told her about you. She said, maybe kindness is contagious. I think she's right." Keanu paused and smiled faintly. The image of the diner returned to him, the flickering neon sign, the smell of coffee, the sound of Sam's tired laugh. The letter ended with a single, unpolished line. "Just a kind gesture, but I'll remember it for the rest of my life." It wasn't the first time someone had written to thank him, but something about this one felt different. There was no praise for his fame, no mention of movies or headlines, just gratitude, written from one human being to another. Mara watched from across the desk. "Everything okay?" Keanu nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said softly. "Better than okay." He read the letter again, slower this time, noticing the details he'd missed, the way Sam had described the rest stop, the smell of the desert air, the sound of the trucks outside. Then his eyes landed on a line that made him stop. It was a little place just off Interstate 40 near Flagstaff. He whispered the words aloud. "Rest stop, outside. Flagstaff." The name stirred something inside him. He remembered the smell of diesel and the faces inside the diner. Lydia, Eli, Marla, the ordinary people who had carried an extraordinary night. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. "Mara," he said, standing, "how busy is my schedule next month?" Mara looked down at the planner in her hands. "You've got press for the new film in New York the first week, then a charity gala in San Francisco right after. But after that," she paused, glancing up with a small smile, "you've got 3 days clear. Do you want me to block them off for rest?" Keanu folded the letter again, running his thumb over the creased paper. "Not rest," he said, quietly. "A ride." Mara raised an eyebrow. "You mean on your bike?" He nodded. "Yeah. I need to take a trip. Nothing fancy, just the open road for a few days." She smiled knowingly. "You always say that right before something important happens." He laughed softly. "Maybe it's not the road that changes things. Maybe it's what you find along the way." He slipped the letter into his jacket pocket, the paper rustling against the fabric. It felt right there, close to his heart, as though the words carried a weight that didn't belong on a shelf or a desk. As the day went on, he tried to focus on his usual work, reviewing project proposals, signing autographs, meeting briefly with a director, but the words kept echoing in his mind. "Just a kind gesture, but I'll remember it for the rest of my life." That single line replayed like a melody that wouldn't fade. It reminded him of something his sister had once said during her treatment years ago. "You don't have to save the whole world, Keanu. Just be kind to the piece of it in front of you." He had carried that sentence for years, but reading Sam's letter brought it back with a new clarity. Maybe kindness wasn't supposed to stay still. Maybe it had to move, like the trucks that carried America's heartbeat through the night. Later that evening, when the city lights flickered on outside his apartment balcony, Keanu stood there with a mug of tea in his hand, staring out at the skyline. The letter sat open beside him on the table. He picked it up once more and reread the ending. Rest stop outside Flagstaff. He whispered it again, smiling. He imagined the place now, with Lydia pouring coffee for truckers, Eli wiping down tables, and maybe a few new faces laughing in the booths. He wondered if they'd ever know how far that single night's kindness had reached. He decided then that he would ride there soon, not as a star, not as someone to be recognized or thanked, just as another traveler on the same road that carried men like Sam. He placed the letter carefully inside a small leather pouch on his desk, the kind he used to carry on long rides. Then he turned off the lights, leaving only the faint glow of the city spilling across the room. As he closed the door behind him, he thought to himself that gratitude shouldn't end with one night. It should echo, mile after mile, until it finds its way back home. The desert evening glowed with a faint orange haze as Keanu's motorcycle rumbled along the long stretch of highway. The air was warm and dry, carrying the scent of sagebrush and asphalt. He hadn't told anyone where he was going. The road didn't need an explanation. It was a quiet calling, something inside him that said he needed to see that diner again, the place where a single act of kindness had rippled into something bigger. By the time he reached the outskirts of Flagstaff, the sun had dipped below the horizon. The highway lights blinked on one by one, as if guiding him forward. He slowed his bike as the familiar rest stop came into view, its neon sign now brighter and freshly painted. The words had changed. Where it once read simply, Hunt's Diner, it now said, Drivers welcome, first coffee free. He smiled under his helmet. The small change said everything. He parked near the same row of trucks he remembered from that night and pulled off his gloves. The air smelled of fresh coffee and warm bread. It felt like coming home to a place he'd only visited once. He took off his helmet, tucked it under his arm, and stepped inside. The bell above the door gave its familiar ring. The diner looked both the same and entirely different. The walls were repainted, a soft cream color, and near the entrance, a large corkboard caught his eye. It was covered with photos, smiling truckers, postcards, and thank you notes written in different handwriting. Above it, bold letters read, The Wall of Thanks. Keanu stood still for a moment, reading some of the notes. Coffee and kindness, when I needed both. This place feels like family now. To the man who reminded us to look up and see each other. His throat tightened slightly. He recognized Sam in one of the photos. A grainy print of him leaning against his truck, smiling, holding a slice of pie. Someone had written under it, Every mile matters. He took a slow breath, then turned toward the counter. Eli was there, taller now, wiping down a stack of mugs with practiced ease. His hair was longer, and he looked more confident, but his wide grin was the same. Evening, Eli said, not recognizing him at first. Coffee's free for drivers till 9. Keanu chuckled softly. I'll take you up on that. Eli poured a fresh cup, sliding it across the counter. You on a long haul tonight? Something like that, Keanu said. He adjusted his baseball cap, keeping his tone casual. Lydia came out from the kitchen, her apron dusted with flour. Her hair was streaked with silver now, but her movements were calm, lighter somehow. She looked up, then froze. Recognition flickered across her face, not the kind that comes from fame, but from memory. She studied his eyes for a moment, and a small, knowing smile spread across her face. Well, she said softly, I was wondering when you'd find your way back. Keanu smiled faintly, taking off his cap. Didn't think you'd recognize me after all this time, he said. Lydia wiped her hands on her apron, her eyes shining in the soft diner light. Those eyes don't forget a thing, she replied. And besides, I see reminders of that night every day. She motioned toward the wall of thanks. You started all this, you know. He shook his head. I didn't start anything. You did. You just remembered who you were. Lydia let out a quiet laugh, nodding slowly. Maybe, but you were the spark. After you left, word got around, somehow. Drivers started stopping here more often, leaving notes, paying meals, forward. Traffic doubled within months. I didn't even have to advertise. Eli leaned over the counter, proud. We even started a fund, he said. It's called the Roadside Help Fund. We use it to help stranded drivers, flat tires, broken rigs, even motel rooms if they're short on cash. People donate every week. Keanu listened, warmth rising in his chest. That's incredible, he said softly. Lydia poured him a cup of coffee, setting it gently in front of him. Funny thing is, she said, this place feels alive again. For years I ran it like a business. Now it feels like a purpose. Keanu took a sip, the same dark roast he remembered. That's the best kind of success, he said. She leaned against the counter studying him. You know, when I saw you that night, I was angry. I thought you were trying to humiliate me. But later, I realized you weren't standing against me. You were standing for him, and maybe for everyone like him. I didn't understand it until I lost my pride long enough to listen. Keanu met her gaze. Sometimes pride's just pain in disguise. You faced it. That's not easy. Lydia smiled gently. Pain can ruin a person or rebuild them. Guess I was lucky enough to get a second chance. Eli came back from refilling the sugar jars and grinned. Wait till you see the pie case. Mrs. Hunt brought back her dad's recipes. The truckers say it's the best in Arizona. Keanu chuckled. I'll take their word for it. No, you won't, Lydia said, already slicing a piece of pecan pie. She placed it in front of him. On the house, some traditions don't change. He took a bite and smiled. Your father would be proud, he said. Her expression softened. Maybe he's watching, keeping the coffee hot somewhere out there on the road. They both laughed quietly, the sound mingling with the gentle hum of conversation from the booths. A group of drivers nearby were telling stories, one of them pointing toward the wall of thanks, as if sharing a legend. Keanu glanced around the room, taking it all in the chatter, the laughter, the smell of pie and coffee. It was a small place, yet somehow it felt vast, filled with the spirit of everyone who had passed through. He finished his coffee and stood, pulling on his jacket. Keep doing what you're doing, he said softly. This place matters more than you know. Lydia reached out and squeezed his hand. So did you. As he walked back out into the night, Eli waved from behind the counter. The bell over the door jingled, and the desert breeze met him again. But to him it said everything about how far kindness could travel. The Missouri air was heavy with the scent of rain when Sam finally pulled his truck into the long gravel driveway. The tires crunched softly as the engine idled to a stop. His small farmhouse sat on the edge of an open field, the porch light glowing like a welcome beacon. After weeks on the road, there was no better sight. He climbed down, stretching his sore shoulders, and smiled when he saw the front door swing open. His daughter Rachel stood there, waving a sheet of paper high in the air, her voice bright and excited. Dad, you're home. Sam laughed, walking toward her as she ran across the porch steps. You're supposed to be in class, he said, pretending to scold her. Not today, she said, grinning wide. You have to see this. She handed him the letter, her eyes shining. He unfolded it carefully, his hands still rough from weeks of driving. The university's logo sat at the top, and in bold print below it read, Congratulations on your acceptance to the nursing program. For a moment, he couldn't speak. His throat tightened as he looked at her face so full of life and pride. You did it, he said softly. We did it, she corrected. You've been paying for every mile that got me here, he chuckled, shaking his head. Guess all those sleepless nights were worth it. Rachel smiled, then gestured toward the kitchen window. I made some changes while you were gone. Come see. He followed her inside. The smell of coffee and baked bread filled the small house, and sunlight poured through the curtains. Above the kitchen table, in a simple wooden frame, hung the note Keanu had written. Thanks for keeping the country moving. K.R. Sam stopped in his tracks. You framed it? Rachel nodded. It's part of the family now. Every time I feel tired from studying, I look at it. It reminds me that people notice hard work, even when you think they don't. Sam swallowed hard, his eyes misting. You sure got your mom's heart, he said quietly. Rachel squeezed his hand. And your stubbornness. He laughed at that, his voice rough from emotion. Fair trade, I guess. They sat down at the table together, and Rachel pulled out her phone. Dad, you have to see this, she said. Someone shared a post about that diner where you met him. It's gone viral. She turned the screen toward him. The video showed Lydia's diner, newly painted, with the sign "Drivers Welcome First Coffee Free" glowing under the sunset. A reporter's voice narrated how a small roadside cafe had become a symbol of appreciation for America's truckers. The camera panned to the wall of thanks, showing messages and photos from drivers across the country. Sam leaned closer, speechless. That's the place, he whispered. That's the diner. Rachel looked up at him, her expression soft. You're part of something bigger now, Dad. People are sharing your story. He sat back, his hand resting on the table, the framed note shining in the morning light. For the first time in his life, he didn't just feel useful, he felt seen. That evening, the smell of grilled corn drifted from the back porch while cicadas buzzed in the tall grass. Rachel set the table, humming as she poured sweet tea into 2 glasses. Sam sat outside on the porch swing, the letter of acceptance still folded in his shirt pocket. The note from Keanu framed inside his mind as clearly as it hung on the wall. The sound of a pickup truck approached from down the road. Its headlights swept across the yard before it came to a stop beside Sam's rig. Out stepped his son David, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a ball cap backward and holding a small microphone. Hey, old man, David called, grinning. Heard you've been busy changing lives out on the highway. Sam chuckled, standing to give him a hug. Don't believe everything you read on the internet. David laughed and held up the mic. Too late. I've got proof. The story's everywhere. Truckers all over are talking about it. I figured I'd make it official. Mind doing a little interview for my podcast? Rachel leaned against the doorway, smiling. He started recording before dinner again. David winked. Good stories. Don't wait for dessert. They sat around the porch table while the last bit of sunlight faded into orange and gold. The cicadas quieted, replaced by the soft hum of the night. David set up his small recorder, placing it on the table between them. So, David began, tell me about that night. The one everyone's calling the Day Kindness Road Shotgun. Sam laughed softly. That's what they're calling it? David nodded. It's got a nice ring to it. Now tell me what really happened. Sam leaned back, looking out over the field before he spoke. It wasn't anything fancy. I was tired, dirty, just looking for a meal. A woman told me I couldn't sit down because I didn't look clean enough. I was about to leave when a stranger stood up for me. Didn't yell, didn't fight, just showed kindness. He made people remember what respect looks like. Rachel smiled quietly, listening. Sam continued, his voice soft. That one moment changed everything. It changed that diner, that town, and maybe a few hearts along the way. I didn't even know who he was until later. Turns out, it didn't matter. David leaned forward. What did you learn from it? Sam took a deep breath. That it doesn't take a big gesture to change the road you're on. Sometimes, it's just a thank you that sticks. David let the silence hang for a moment before turning off the recorder. That's perfect, Dad. They sat together as the sky turned deep blue. Rachel brought out a plate of pie, still warm from the oven. Guess I had to make something to match your story, she said with a grin. Sam smiled, watching his 2 kids laugh across the table. You already did, he said softly. The porch light flickered, and somewhere in the distance, a truck horn echoed faintly down the road, steady, strong, and endless, just like the kindness that had carried him home. It started quietly, the way good stories always do. A local newspaper in Arizona ran a small feature about a diner that had changed its sign to read "Drivers Welcome First Coffee Free." The reporter, a young woman named Claire Donnelly, had stopped there while covering a highway safety story. She noticed the wall of thanks, the photos, the notes written in every color of ink. Something about it felt bigger than a local piece. When Lydia served her coffee, Claire asked about the wall. Lydia hesitated, then smiled and said, "It started with one night. A man did something kind for a stranger. We just decided to keep it going." Claire pressed a little more, curious. "Do you remember the man's name?" Lydia hesitated again. "I do," she said carefully, "but that's not really the point." Still, the story found its way online the next morning under the headline, "Roadside Diner Honors Truckers with Wall of Thanks." Within hours, it began spreading beyond Arizona. Drivers across the Midwest shared the article, adding their own stories in the comments. Photos of hands scarred by years of labor, notes about families waiting at home, and words of gratitude for the people who kept goods moving when the world had stopped. Then, one user posted a photo of a note pinned to the wall, a small white slip of paper with the words, "Thanks for keeping the country moving, K.R." The thread exploded. Someone asked, "Do you think it's really him?" Another replied, "Who else writes like that?" By noon, a national entertainment outlet picked up the story. Actor buys dinner for truckers, inspires nationwide movement. The article traced the diner's location, the viral photos, and the mysterious handwritten note signed K.R. There were no official confirmations, but the story was already alive. Reporters began calling Lydia's diner, asking for interviews. She turned them down gently, repeating the same line. "The story doesn't belong to me or to him. It belongs to every driver who's been overlooked." Meanwhile, across the country, local diners started joining in. One cafe in Kansas put up a sign that read, "Free breakfast for truckers every Monday." Another in Iowa renamed its special menu the Road Heroes Plate. Hashtags like #ThankATrucker and #KindnessRidesOn began trending on social media. Photos poured in from rest stops, diners, and gas stations, all echoing the same message. In Missouri, Sam saw the article pop up on his phone while refueling at a small station. His face broke into a slow, proud smile as he scrolled through the photos of other truckers being honored. The movement had grown far beyond that lonely diner. "Would you look at that?" he murmured. "It's catching fire." He snapped a photo of his dashboard with Keanu's note still taped above it and posted it online with the caption, "Some roads never end. This one's paved with kindness." Within hours, it was shared thousands of times. Back in Los Angeles, Mara walked into Keanu's office holding a tablet. "You should see this," she said, placing it in front of him. He glanced down, eyebrows lifting slightly, as he read the headline splashed across the screen. "Keanu Reeves sparks national movement for America's truckers." Keanu stared at the headline for a moment, then scrolled through the images. Truckers in flannel shirts and baseball caps were smiling beside steaming mugs of coffee. Waitresses posed by bulletin boards covered in handwritten thank you notes. Families had even joined in, sending messages to drivers who delivered goods to their towns during storms and shortages. Mara watched him closely. "They're crediting you for the whole thing," she said. "Every outlet's calling it the Reeves Ripple." He set the tablet down and leaned back in his chair. "It's not mine," he said quietly. "It never was." Mara smiled faintly. "You're not going to issue a statement?" He shook his head. "If I do, it becomes about me. The story's better without that." She nodded, understanding. "You always did prefer staying in the background." "It's not about humility," Keanu replied softly. "It's about letting gratitude belong to the people who live it." He picked up the letter from Sam, which still sat on the corner of his desk. The edges had begun to curl from being handled so often. He reread the line that had started it all. "Just a kind gesture, but I'll remember it for the rest of my life." Those words had moved quietly through the world, finding their way into hearts he'd never meet. He smiled, imagining Sam out there somewhere, maybe seeing all of this unfold. Across the country, news anchors were sharing stories of diners giving discounts to drivers, rest stops offering free meals, and communities setting up donation boxes for fuel costs. A segment on a morning show featured Lydia and Eli, who had finally agreed to appear on camera. Standing beside the wall of thanks, Lydia told the host, We used to think truckers were just passing through. Now we know they're part of the story that keeps all of us going. One man reminded us of that, and we're trying to keep it alive." Eli added proudly, "We get messages from people in every state now. Some send money, some send photos, some just say thank you. It's like the road itself is talking." The clip played later that evening, and the comments section filled instantly. One viewer wrote, "I'm a teacher, and this made me start a wall of thanks in my classroom." Another said, "I'm a nurse. We hung a sign in our hospital break room. Heroes don't always wear scrubs." The story was no longer about a celebrity gesture. It had become a shared movement, a reflection of what people were still capable of when reminded that kindness was worth noticing. Back in Los Angeles, Keanu stepped out onto his balcony as the city lights flickered below. He looked toward the distant mountains, their outlines faint under the night sky, and felt a quiet peace settle over him. He didn't need headlines or applause. Somewhere out there, the right people were being thanked. That was enough. He whispered into the cool evening air, "Keep rolling safe, Sam." The wind carried his words into the distance, toward the open highways where gratitude now rode beside every driver. Weeks passed, and the movement born from that single night began to grow beyond anything anyone could have imagined. Across the country, truck stops started to change. Handwritten signs appeared in windows reading "Free coffee for drivers" or "Meals on the house for road heroes." In Tennessee, a family-owned diner off Interstate 65 introduced a new breakfast item called the Reeves Plate. It wasn't glamorous, just scrambled eggs, bacon, and a slice of pecan pie. But every order donated $2 to a charity fund for struggling truckers. The owners had hung a framed picture of Keanu's note beside their register, right above a quote that read, "Kindness isn't a performance, it's a legacy." The idea caught fire. Within weeks, restaurants in Ohio, Kansas, and New Mexico joined in. Some started offering discounts for long-haul drivers. Others created bulletin boards where travelers could post thank you notes to each other. Local radio stations picked up on the trend, calling it the Kindness Highway. Out on the road, Sam watched it unfold through his windshield and on his phone. Each time he stopped for gas or a meal, someone would mention it. Drivers shared screenshots of diners offering free coffee and read aloud social media posts written by strangers saying thank you. During one of his fuel stops near Little Rock, another trucker approached him. The man was older, with a weathered face and a deep southern drawl. "You the fella from the Arizona story?" he asked. Sam hesitated, surprised. "I might be," he said cautiously. The man smiled, sticking out his hand. "Then you ought to know you started something good. People talk different now. They look us in the eye." Sam shook his hand firmly, humbled. "I didn't start anything," he said quietly. "A man named Keanu did." The other driver chuckled. "Maybe, but you carried it forward." That night, Sam parked at a rest area overlooking the Mississippi River. The air was cool, and the sound of crickets filled the stillness. He scrolled through his messages and saw a post from Highway Hearts, the new charity fund that had launched just days earlier. The group was organizing its first event to honor drivers across the country. An online gathering streamed live from multiple truck stops. The organizer had written, "We'd be honored if the driver from the Arizona diner story would say a few words, even from the road." Sam stared at the screen for a long moment, his heart pounding. He wasn't used to being asked to speak. He was used to hauling freight, not giving speeches. But something about that request felt right. He replied simply, "If you can patch me in by CB, I'll be there." That night, under a blanket of stars, he practiced what he would say, his words halting at first, then steadying, as he remembered every face from that night, the kindness, the laughter, the healing that followed. A week later, the event went live. Highway Hearts broadcasted from truck stops across 5 states, each filled with drivers, families, and volunteers. Paper banners fluttered in the wind with words like "Thank you, drivers," and "Keep America Moving." Coffee pots steamed, and speakers played soft country music in the background as people gathered to listen. At exactly 7 o'clock, a radio signal buzzed through. A warm, familiar voice came across the speakers, slightly rough around the edges, but strong and sure. "This is Sam Colton," he said over the CB line. "Some of you might know my story. Most of you don't. But I know you, all of you, who keep the wheels turning while the world sleeps." The crowd at one of the stops fell quiet. Truckers removed their caps, leaning closer to the speakers. At another location in Texas, a waitress wiped her hands on her apron, her eyes glistening. Sam took a breath, his voice steady but full of feeling. "A few months back, I was just another tired driver trying to get a meal. I got turned away because I looked like what I am, dirty, worn out, and invisible. But a man stood up for me that night. Didn't know me anything. Just saw a person who needed a little decency." His voice cracked slightly before he continued. "That night changed how I see people and how people see us. Because kindness, when it's real, doesn't stay put. It moves. It rides with you, mile after mile, until it finds the next person who needs it." At the Tennessee diner that had started serving the Reeves plate, the owner turned up the volume, and everyone in the room listened in silence. Sam went on. "Since that night, I've seen things I never thought I would. Diners giving out coffee for free, kids writing thank you cards, truck stops turning into little communities again. All because one man chose kindness over judgment. You don't have to be famous to do that. You just have to notice someone." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "So to everyone out there hauling loads, fixing engines, delivering the things folks depend on, this is for you. You're not invisible anymore. People see you now." There was a long, still moment after he finished. Then, applause broke out through every truck stop where the feed played. Some clapped, others honked their horns outside, their headlights flashing like stars across the open lots. In Los Angeles, Keanu listened quietly from his office, the radio playing on his desk. He smiled softly, recognizing the voice, recognizing the message. Mara glanced at him and said, "That's him, isn't it?" He nodded. "Yeah, and that's what it was all for." On the highway, Sam sat in his cab, listening to the echo of the applause through the static. He looked out at the rows of trucks parked in solidarity, their lights blinking in rhythm. The sound was soft but powerful, a chorus of gratitude rolling across America's endless roads. He smiled to himself and whispered, "Keep it rolling." Then, he turned up the engine, the headlights cutting through the dark, carrying kindness forward into the night. The Highway Hearts launch event was held in a large outdoor pavilion just outside Nashville. Rows of folding chairs filled the space, surrounded by banners that read "Kindness Rides On." Truckers, their families, and volunteers crowded in, the smell of barbecue and fresh coffee drifting through the air. Cameras from local news stations rolled quietly in the background, but the mood was warm, almost like a reunion rather than a press event. Lydia arrived early, wearing her best denim jacket and a simple silver necklace that had belonged to her father. Eli was beside her, helping carry 2 trays of her famous pecan pie. She had agreed to donate desserts for the event, never expecting to become part of the evening's program. When one of the organizers approached her with a clipboard and asked, "Would you say a few words about what started all this?" she hesitated for a long moment. She had thought about that night countless times since it happened, the look on Sam's face, the shame in her own voice, and the quiet dignity with which Keanu had stood between them. The thought of speaking publicly about it made her heart pound, but she also knew it was time. "All right," she said finally. "I'll speak." An hour later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the crowd settled. A small stage stood at the front of the pavilion, decorated with string lights and the Highway Hearts logo, a heart inside a steering wheel. The host, a woman named Marla who had once worked at Lydia's diner before moving to Tennessee, took the microphone. "Tonight," she said, "we celebrate the kindness that began with one simple meal and turned into a movement." The audience applauded, and Marla smiled. "We're honored to have 2 very special guests here, the driver whose courage touched the nation, and the woman who found grace through it. Please welcome Sam Colton and Lydia Hunt." The applause grew as Lydia and Sam stepped onto the stage together. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Sam wore a clean button-down shirt and his old trucker cap, while Lydia's eyes shimmered under the lights. "Hey there, ma'am." Sam said softly, his voice steady but gentle. "Hey yourself," Lydia replied, smiling nervously. The crowd quieted as she turned toward the microphone. "I wasn't sure I could do this," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "But I owe it to all of you, and to this man standing beside me." She looked at Sam, then back at the audience. "That night, I let pride blind me. I saw a hard-working man and treated him like he didn't belong in my diner. I told myself it was about cleanliness or order, but really, it was about me. I was carrying hurt I never dealt with, and I took it out on someone who didn't deserve it." The crowd was silent, every eye fixed on her. Lydia took a deep breath, tears beginning to well. Then, someone else, someone kind, reminded me that decency doesn't come with conditions. That one act changed my life, my business, and my heart. I can't undo what I said that night, but I can live differently because of it. Lydia's voice wavered, but she didn't look away from the crowd. "I've served coffee to thousands of travelers, but I never truly saw them until that night. I was so focused on what people looked like that I forgot who they were. I forgot that every person who walks through a door carries a story. And this man's story reminded me of my father, the man I lost too soon, the man who also lived on the road." A hush swept over the pavilion. The setting sun glowed through the string lights above, bathing her face in soft gold. Sam listened quietly, his hands clasped in front of him, his eyes glistening. Lydia turned toward him, her words trembling but true. "Sam, I'm sorry. For what I said. For how I made you feel. For forgetting that kindness costs nothing. You showed me grace when I didn't deserve it. And tonight, I want to say, thank you." Sam stepped forward, shaking his head gently. "You don't owe me anything, Lydia," he said. "We all carry our own miles. You found your way back. That's enough." She smiled through her tears. "Then maybe we both got a little lost on the same road." The crowd chuckled softly, a ripple of warmth spreading through the air. Sam hesitated for a moment, then opened his arms. Lydia moved toward him, and they hugged an embrace that erased everything that had once divided them. It wasn't a grand moment. It was quiet, human, and full of forgiveness. The audience rose to their feet in applause. Truckers clapped, families cheered, and even the reporters put their cameras down for a moment to take it in. Eli, standing near the front, with a plate of pie in his hand, wiped at his eyes, whispering, "About time." Behind the stage, Keanu stood in the shadow of a support beam, watching the scene unfold. He wore a simple jacket and a baseball cap, unnoticed by the crowd. His lips curved into a soft smile as he watched Lydia and Sam embrace, surrounded by the very people who had once been invisible to the world. Mara stood beside him, whispering, "You sure you don't want to go out there? They'd love to thank you in person." Keanu shook his head. "They don't need to. This isn't my story anymore." He watched as the MC stepped back to the microphone, her voice full of emotion. "This is what compassion looks like when it comes full circle. One diner, one night, one small act, and now a movement that's changing lives across the country." The audience cheered again. Lydia and Sam waved from the stage, their faces glowing under the lights. Somewhere in the distance, a line of trucks honked in unison, the sound carrying like a hymn through the Tennessee hills. Keanu turned to leave, slipping through the side exit unnoticed. The night air was cool and calm. As he walked toward the parking lot, he glanced back once more, seeing the glow of the lights and hearing the faint echo of applause. He smiled quietly and whispered to himself, "The circle's complete." Then he walked into the darkness, content knowing the kindness had found its way home. The city was quiet that night when Keanu returned home. Los Angeles stretched out below him, glittering under the weight of millions of lights. Yet despite the glow, his mind was far away back in Tennessee, back in that pavilion where Lydia and Sam had embraced under strings of golden bulbs. He poured himself a cup of tea and sat by the window, the same spot where he often went to think. The letter from Sam still rested in its envelope on his desk, worn at the corners from how many times he had unfolded it. Nearby lay the small notebook where he wrote his private reflections. No publicity. No audience. Just the truth he wanted to remember when the world grew loud. He opened it slowly and began to write. Fame amplifies mistakes, he wrote in careful strokes. Every misstep echoes louder than it should. But maybe, just maybe, it can also amplify kindness. The difference is what you choose to give your voice to. He paused, tapping the pen against the page, the night breeze slipping through the half-open window. He thought about how the story had traveled from one diner to an entire nation. He hadn't planned it. He hadn't even meant to be noticed. Yet somehow, that small act had turned into something far greater than himself. He continued writing. That rest stop wasn't about redemption or image. It was about reflection. Every person in that diner that night carried something: shame, exhaustion, pride, grief, and for one moment, we all put it down. Maybe that's what kindness really is, setting our burdens down long enough to help someone else carry theirs. He set the pen down and leaned back. His thoughts drifted to his mother, Patricia, and the long nights she used to work as a costume designer. He remembered waiting up for her as a boy, the way she'd come home exhausted, still smelling faintly of fabric glue and coffee. Some nights, she'd tell him how people at the studio would treat her like background, never rude, just invisible. He remembered once asking her, "Doesn't that bother you?" She'd smiled and said, "I'd rather be invisible for doing good work than noticed for doing nothing." He smiled now at the memory. It was her quiet resilience that had shaped how he saw the world, how he valued decency over recognition. He thought of her while writing the next line. My mother worked late nights sewing costumes for strangers who never learned her name. She never asked for credit, only respect. Maybe that's what this diner story really became, a mirror, showing what America looks like when we remember to respect the hands that keep it running. The thought lingered like a melody he didn't want to end. Outside, a siren wailed faintly in the distance, swallowed quickly by the hum of the city. Keanu picked up the pen again. Kindness doesn't need a camera. It just needs direction. And I think I've finally found mine. He underlined the last sentence once, slowly, then looked out at the horizon where the city lights met the dark edges of the Pacific. Keanu turned the page and began again, his handwriting slow and deliberate. The rest stop was never just a diner. It was a reflection, a mirror held up to all of us. A place that reminded me how deeply people need to be seen, not for what they have, but for what they give. He paused and took a sip of tea, watching the steam curl upward. The thought of Sam's cracked voice over the CB radio still echoed in his mind. One night changed how I see people. That single sentence had replayed in his head more than once since the event. It wasn't just about Sam, it was about everyone who had ever felt unseen, everyone who worked hard and went home unnoticed. He wrote again, there are millions of Sams out there. Men and women keeping the country alive without ever asking for applause. If the world took one moment to look their way, maybe we'd all see a little clearer. He set the pen down, letting his words settle before adding the next line. I don't want this to end as a news story or a viral post. I want it to live as something real, something that keeps moving. His eyes drifted to the corner of his office, where an unopened box sat against the wall. It contained thank you letters from hospital workers his foundation had helped years earlier. The memory of those days came flooding back, the anonymous donations, the small acts that had quietly changed lives. Maybe Highway Hearts could grow the same way, quietly, without fanfare. He turned back to the journal and wrote his promise. Through my foundation, I'll expand Highway Hearts. Quietly. No speeches, no headlines. Just support fuel vouchers, meal cards, rest stations that remind drivers they matter. It won't carry my name, only theirs. The conviction felt calm, not rushed or impulsive. It was something he knew he was meant to do. He smiled faintly, remembering how Lydia's diner had become a symbol without ever trying to be one. That, he realized, was the power of authenticity, when something good spreads because it's true, not because it's branded. He closed the notebook gently, his fingers resting on the cover for a long moment. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the window pane, and the city lights flickered across the room. He leaned back in his chair, his voice barely above a whisper. "Fame amplifies mistakes," he repeated softly, "but it can also amplify kindness." As he rose to turn off the lights, he looked once more at Sam's letter lying beside the notebook. He smiled, almost as if speaking to the man across the miles. "You were right, my friend. Kindness is contagious." He tucked the letter safely into the journal, slipped both into the drawer, and stood by the remainder window again. The first glow of dawn was breaking over the horizon. The city was waking, and somewhere out there, engines were starting. Headlights cutting through the fog, drivers rolling toward another day. Keanu watched them silently and whispered, "Keep the road kind."
1 year passed like a steady hum along the highway, quiet, persistent, and full of motion. Across the country, what had once been a single spark had turned into a living network of compassion.
The Highway Hearts Initiative had grown from a grassroots effort into a nationwide chain of goodwill. At dawn, in places like Montana, Ohio, and New Mexico, rest stops now displayed the same warm phrase above their doors. "Drivers welcome, first coffee free." The words glowed under the morning light, like a promise to anyone weary enough to need them. Some diners had murals of truckers and their rigs painted on the walls. Others had walls of thanks covered in messages from travelers, children, and families. One note pinned in Oklahoma read, "To the man who stopped for me when my tire blew in the rain, I got home because of you." Another from Utah said, "You don't know me, but your kindness made my day lighter. Keep driving safe." At one rest stop in Tennessee, a high school class had painted a large sign that read, "Heroes of the Highway." Every Friday morning, students came out to serve coffee and sandwiches to passing drivers. A local teacher had told them the story of Lydia's Diner, and they wanted to keep it alive. When interviewed by a small-town reporter, one of the students simply said, "We just wanted to be part of the kindness." In Missouri, Sam Colton's home had become a gathering place for stories. His son David now hosted a monthly podcast called Highway Voices, where drivers shared stories of generosity and humanity from the road. Some talked about rescuing stranded motorists, others about finding unexpected help at rest stops, displaying that familiar phrase. Each episode ended with the same sign-off, "Keep kindness rolling." Sam himself rarely appeared on the podcast, but when he did, listeners tuned in from across the country. He always spoke humbly, never mentioning his name from that first story, but people knew who he was. As the seasons changed, Highway Hearts held its first scholarship dinner, funded by donations from truck stops and diners nationwide. The event supported the children of long-haul drivers who wanted to pursue nursing, teaching, or trade school. On the stage that night, Lydia presented a check to a group of students, her voice strong and confident. "This is for the families who wait at home," she said, "because every mile on the road begins with love waiting somewhere." And somewhere, in the back of that event, Keanu watched quietly. No spotlight, no announcement, just a man in a simple jacket and jeans, standing near the door with a faint smile as he saw how far the kindness had spread. The movement no longer carried his name. It didn't need to. It belonged to the people, the drivers, the families, the waitresses, and the strangers who decided to see one another differently. Late that spring, the Missouri air carried the scent of wildflowers as the community gathered inside a small-town auditorium for the nursing school graduation. Rows of folding chairs filled the space, families whispering, camera flashes popping like soft bursts of light. Among the crowd sat Sam Colton, his work-worn hands folded neatly in his lap, his eyes shining with quiet pride. Rachel stood on the stage in her white gown and blue stole, her hair pinned up neatly beneath her cap. She scanned the crowd, spotting her father near the middle row. He gave her a nod, the same steady nod he'd always given before a long drive, the one that said, "You've got this." When her name was called, the audience clapped and cheered, but Sam didn't clap right away. He just watched, his chest tightening with gratitude too deep for words. As she crossed the stage, she paused at the podium to deliver the short speech she had been chosen to give as part of the graduating class. She adjusted the microphone and began softly. "A lot of people ask nurses why we choose this path. The answer is, it's simple. It's about helping people, even when no one's watching. It's about seeing someone who's tired, scared, or hurting, and deciding to care anyway. Her voice steadied as she went on. A year ago, my father taught me that lesson without even knowing it. He's a truck driver. One night, he was helped by a stranger who saw him not as someone beneath him, but as someone worth kindness. That act changed everything for him and for me. The room grew still. Even those who didn't know the story leaned forward, drawn in. Rachel smiled through tears. Today, I dedicate this degree to every driver who keeps hope moving across this country. You may not wear a uniform or stand on a stage, but you're the heartbeat of America. Thank you for keeping us connected. The audience rose in applause. Sam bowed his head for a moment, overwhelmed. When Rachel stepped off the stage, she found him waiting near the aisle, his eyes wet with pride. "You did good, sweetheart," he said, his voice breaking. "Couldn't have done it without you," she whispered, hugging him tightly. Neither of them noticed the man sitting quietly in the very back row. Keanu Reeves, dressed in a dark jacket and baseball cap, watched the scene unfold with a faint smile. He had slipped in just before the ceremony began, unnoticed, sitting near the exit where the light hit softly through a high window. As the applause filled the room, Keanu stood. His eyes lingered on the stage where Rachel had spoken, on the family who had unknowingly inspired a movement. He slipped his hands into his pockets, the corners of his mouth lifting into a quiet expression of peace. He walked out into the warm afternoon light, the hum of engines echoing from a nearby road. A group of trucks passed in the distance, their horns sounding like a salute to everything that had begun with a single moment of decency. Keanu looked toward the horizon and whispered, "Keep it rolling, Sam." Then he climbed onto his motorcycle, started the engine, and rode off toward the open highway, just another traveler among millions, content to let the kindness speak for itself. The day faded into gold over the Arizona desert as trucks rolled past the same rest stop where everything had begun. The diner's neon sign glowed against the setting sun, its message now familiar to travelers from every corner of the country. Drivers welcome, first coffee, free. Inside, the tables were full, laughter mixing with the soft clinking of plates and the low hum of country music on the radio. Behind the counter, Eli was now taller, his shoulders broader, his movements practiced. He poured a steady stream of coffee into a chipped white mug and slid it across to a young driver sitting at the bar. The man looked exhausted, dust on his boots, grease on his hands, eyes weary from the road. "Long haul?" Eli asked, with a friendly grin. The driver nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. 3 states in 2 days. Just trying to make it home by morning." Eli smiled and poured another refill. "Then this one's on the house." The driver blinked, surprised. "For real?" "Every driver's first cup is free here," Eli said. "House rule. Started about a year ago. Someone believed people like you deserved a thank you." The driver smiled faintly, the tension in his face easing. "Well, tell them it worked. This means more than you know." Eli nodded. "I think they already know." From the kitchen, Lydia peeked out, watching the small exchange with quiet pride. She wiped her hands on her apron and leaned against the doorframe. Every time she saw a tired traveler walk in and leave with a lighter heart, she thought about that night, the night a stranger had shown her what grace really looked like. At the far end of the diner, the wall of thanks had grown so large it now filled an entire side of the room. Notes from every state fluttered slightly under the air vents. Some were written by truckers, others by their families. A few were penned by children, their letters crooked but heartfelt. One in particular, written in a child's uneven scrawl, read, "Thank you for driving the food that feeds us." Outside, the sky deepened into orange and violet, the desert wind carrying the low hum of engines from the highway. A convoy of trucks passed by, their headlights cutting through the dusk like glowing threads weaving across the land. The rest stop lights flickered on, illuminating the sign that had become a symbol of something far greater than a business, something that had turned into a movement. Inside, the young driver finished his coffee, stretched, and stood. "You know," he said to Eli, "this place reminds me that there are still good folks left in the world. Eli grinned. That's the goal. The driver reached into his wallet and left a $20 bill on the counter. Then let me keep it going. As he stepped outside, the wind caught the edge of a folded note pinned near the door, a simple white one, yellowed slightly from the Sunday. The words were faded but still legible. Thanks for keeping the country moving, K.R. As the young driver walked toward his rig, the sky turned deep amber. He paused for a moment beside the fuel pumps, taking in the quiet rhythm of the place, the clatter of dishes from inside, the hum of the highway, the steady flicker of the neon sign glowing through the evening air. For a brief second, he felt something he hadn't felt in weeks: peace. He climbed into his cab, started the engine, and rolled down the window. Before pulling away, he looked one last time at the diner door. Through the glass, he could see Lydia laughing with a group of regulars, Eli wiping the counter, and a few drivers swapping stories in their booths. It looked ordinary, but somehow, it felt sacred. A voice seemed to echo faintly in his mind. Not loud, but calm and grounded. Sometimes it takes one act of respect. The voice said, to clean the stain of indifference. The camera lingered on the road outside, where the headlights of passing trucks stretched into the distance like a stream of light flowing endlessly through the dark. The world kept moving, but something in it had changed. The shot cut to a series of images, truck stops across the country displaying the same words: drivers welcome. Volunteers handing out sandwiches to long-haul drivers, children waving at passing trucks from the side of the road, families leaving notes of gratitude taped to diner walls. Each moment simple, unremarkable on its own, but together forming a portrait of a nation rediscovering its heart. The next image showed Sam back behind the wheel, the sun rising over the highway. The note from Keanu was still taped to his dashboard, its edges curling slightly with age. He reached up and smoothed it with his fingers, smiling softly. Still rolling, he murmured. Then came a glimpse of Rachel at a hospital, her nursing badge clipped to her scrubs. She poured a cup of coffee for an elderly patient and said, "First one's on the house," smiling as she walked away. The patient laughed, not realizing the phrase carried a legacy. The music swelled softly as the camera returned to the diner at sunset, the same booth, the same warm light spilling across the counter. Lydia placed a fresh pot of coffee beside the register, her hand brushing over the old note near the door. The voice returned once more, thoughtful and sincere. Kindness doesn't need a name. It doesn't need credit or cameras. It only needs one person brave enough to begin. The scene held for a long moment as the neon sign flickered brighter against the falling night. A convoy of trucks passed by, horns sounding like a quiet hymn to the open road. Then the final line came, simple and resonant. If one gesture can remind us that everyone deserves respect, imagine what 1,000 could do. The words faded gently into the drive. Sound of rolling tires, wind, and soft guitar music in the background. And then the closing message appeared, inviting every viewer to take part. Have you ever met someone whose small gesture changed your whole day? Tell us your story below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories of everyday heroes. The screen faded to black, leaving behind only the faint echo of the highway and the lingering warmth of a world made just a little kinder.